All right, welcome back, folks. See people trickling back in from their breakout rooms. All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope you got a chance to meet someone new and get to know some folks while you're here. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start our session today on starting a new fruit orchard. So I'd first like to introduce our presenters today, Larry and his wonderful wife, Jennifer Stevenson. So Larry lives in Independence, Mississippi. His business is Southern Cultured Orchards and Nursery. Larry, it's a hard one to say. It's a mouthful. I love the name, but it's hard to say. And they specialize in locally adapted heirloom fruit trees, ones that originate in heat and humidity of the Southeast, like Alabama. And they focus on sustainable growing methods and low maintenance growing methods, which I know we are probably all very eager to hear about. So his current passion is Deep South apples, and he also experiments with Asian persimmons, mulberries, pawpaws, and citrus. So Larry has a depth of knowledge and experience and expertise, and we're really excited to share that with you. Larry or Jennifer, is there anything you'd like to say before we get started?
I will say there's one little correction in the video. Hi, I'm Jennifer, but there's one little correction in the video because this was our first time doing a video, and you'll notice when watching it that I had my iPhone upright instead of sideways for a better viewing transfer to a computer. But one little error that we didn't correct was Larry was talking about the things he propagated, and he said that he propagated muscadines, which he has a couple of times, but he's really meant to say mulberries because he's really been focused on mulberries a lot, and there seems to be a new surge in interest in mulberries. So that little misspoken word right there, it was supposed to be mulberries instead of muscadines. But other than that, I think everything will be self-explanatory, and Larry's encyclopedia of fruit tree knowledge and willing to answer any questions anybody has afterwards.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Wonderful. With that, we're going to start with a video, like Jennifer said, that she and Larry filmed at their farm so that you can see what they're doing and what things look like for them. As I mentioned at the very beginning, feel free to drop questions as the video is going. And if it's something that applies in real time, we'll go ahead and pause the video and have a discussion. Otherwise, we'll get to them at the end. So if a question comes up, don't feel like you have to hold on to it. Feel free to put it in the chat box and we'll make sure to address it. Okay, great. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start our video. If you'll just give me 1 second and I will share my screen and we'll get going.
Mulberry martini.
All right, here we go.
Welcome to Alabama Sustainable Agriculture Network's virtual conference. Thank you to Charlotte, Aubrey, and Rachel for arranging this, and to my wife, Jennifer, who's doing the filming. It took a lot of work to do this, 40 years in the making, you could say. I'm Larry Stevenson, the owner of Southern Cultured Orchards and Nursery. I have a small nursery business about 30 miles south of Memphis in Independence, Mississippi. I specialize in heirloom old homestead varieties of apples and pears, muscadines, persimmons, and Asian persimmons that I've gathered up all over the North Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia, ones that are suitable for this region. Standard varieties of fruit trees will not do in this area, and I'm not a standard kind of a guy. Today's topic is starting a new fruit orchard. We have moved recently this year from Carroll County, which is 100 miles south of here. The main thing that sold me on this property is this. About 2.5 acres of cleared land, no stumps, just right for starting my new permanent fruit orchard. It's not flat, it's gently rolling, so my trees will have drainage. Very few trees will tolerate waterlogged soil. They need drainage. At my acres of planted over 40 years, but everything is wrong there. I planted the wrong varieties in the wrong places. I didn't prune and train them the right way because I didn't know how to at that time. They were just set out just willy-nilly over a long period of time, decades. The soil there is not great for fruit trees. So I didn't mind moving so much because this puts me in the fortunate position of being able to start all over again and make a fresh new start and do everything exactly right from the beginning. Afternoon sun. Most fruit trees will tolerate at least half a day of shade, but for full fruit production, you really want full sun. Your soil, 4 basic types I can talk about. Pure sand, hard red clay, which is common for me, rich delta soil, which probably won't need many amendments, and loam. Loam is what we'd all prefer, a rich mix of organic and mineral substances with good tilth. By tilth, I mean texture, and good drainage for water. Very few of us have good loamy soil. To start off, there's 2 things you can do to prepare for your new orchard: subsoil and lime to correct the pH. This is a subsoiler device. This hooks to a tractor, 3-point hitch, as you can see. What you do is drag this to the ground. It digs in, and you pull it as deep as you can, 22 inches in this case. I dig this through the hard red clay to break up the hard pan layer of soil underneath the soil, which is compacted soil. This clay soil is hard anyway. It does not get looser as you go deeper. It gets even more compacted. Rainwater can't easily percolate through that. It tends to run off. This clay soil will hold water, but it takes it a while to soak in. I think it's very beneficial if you'll drag this and break up that layer of hard pan underneath the soil. I'd go 4 feet deep if I had a tractor big enough to pull it. In this area, we commonly have intrusions of a hard blue clay, comes up in bubbles. Rainwater won't penetrate through that. So I believe it's very beneficial to drag this big spike through the ground and break up that layer of hard pan and allow rainwater to soak through. And it will allow the fruit tree roots to penetrate better, of course. The goal is to trap all your rainwater on your property. You don't want it to flow off down into a ditch or your neighbor's property. You want to keep all your water here on your property that you can get. I think subsoiling is best suited for a big area. It would be hard to get it in a smaller area, a quarter or a half acre. I don't think you'll see immediate effects from subsoiling, but I'm convinced in the long term, that's one of the best things you can do to start a new orchard. Liming your orchard. By liming, I mean correcting the pH level in your soil. On the pH scale, 1.0 is very acid, 7.0 is neutral, and 14 is alkaline. Most of us will have acid soil. Most plants would prefer a soil pH of between 6.0 and 7. Most plants even will tolerate acid soil, but to really thrive, it needs to be more neutral. And you correct that with lime, calcium carbonate. The pH level makes a big difference in how every plant grows. For those of us with hard red clay, like we have here, I typically see a pH level between 4.5 and 5.5. Very common in North Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia. Correct it. 6.0 to 6.5 is ideal. You see, when the soil is too acidic, say it's 5.2, for example, the chemical process by which the plant roots absorb nutrients cannot be efficient at that level. I mean, physically, chemically, that chemical reaction cannot occur. When the soil pH is 5.2, say, the The plant can only utilize about 50% of the available nutrients, ones you add or in the soil naturally. You can pour triple 13 on it till the cows come home, and that excess fertilizer will just be washed away or wasted. The plant can make that chemical reaction occur. It's only when the pH gets near neutral level 7, between 6 and 7, that the plant can utilize 100% of the fertilizer. So if your your pH level is not correct in the soil, you're wasting fertilizer. The exceptions would be blueberries, azaleas, and rhododendrons. Those plants require acid soil. If those thrive in your area, if you have blueberry plantations nearby, you probably have acid soil. Most people north of the central parts of Mississippi and Alabama will have acid soil. If you happen to live in an area where limestone is naturally occurring, if you have alkaline soil, you can add powdered sulfur to acidify your soil. That's not my experience. I've never had to do it, but you see more alkaline soils out west than you do in the southeast. You can pass by a lot of old farming fields, abandoned fields, and you see lush growths of broom sedge growing out there. If you see a lot of broom sedge growing, that's an indication that you have acid soil. This applies equally well to vegetable and grain crops and hay, I think. I think there's literally nothing better that you can do to improve your soil than to correct the pH, usually by liming. For the long-term health benefit, there's just nothing better. The pH has to be right. A healthy plant in proper pH soil is resistant to disease. It'll be healthy, more resistant to diseases, and will grow with vigor. Plants will tolerate acid soil, but there's a difference between tolerating soil and surviving and flourishing. And we want our trees to flourish, of course. The most commonly asked question I get, how much fertilizer to pile onto my fruit tree? Fertilizing is probably the least important aspect of growing fruit trees. Our annual crops, like corn and tomato and vegetables, they have a small root mass. They have to produce in one short growing season. So yeah, of course, you have to encourage them with a little fertilizer. A fruit tree is a perennial plant, remember? They're in it for the long term. Fruit trees typically will throw out roots 100 yards from the mother tree. They'll throw out roots all over, and they'll grow deep down into the ground. So they're absorbing nutrients from a wide area, and they'll store those nutrients in their woody tissues over winter. So it's a different mindset growing perennial plants than annual plants. And I tell people, spend your money on lime rather than fertilizer. They don't like to hear that, because lime is just dirt, and you have to pay money for that dirt, and then you have to have the labor to spread it out, and you don't see any immediate effect, because when you lime properly, it usually takes 6 months to a year for lime to have a full effect and actually make much difference on the pH. Where we like to fertilize trees because it's easy. You go to the feed store, you buy a triple 13, you throw handfuls out by your tree, and you see immediate effect. The grass turn green around it, and you see a flush of new growth on your trees. But actually, you don't want a young fruit tree to grow too fast. You don't want growth above the ground. You want the roots to establish and the roots to develop a good rooting system before the tree puts on a flush of growth. So fertilizer, spend your money on lime and other nutrients to encourage the roots of your trees. I've got a friend in North Mississippi who has a collection of 600 apple trees. And every time I go there, I'm just amazed at the size of his apple leaves. They're as big as cottonwood leaves, like this big around, My apple trees don't look like that. And the reason why is because he has long ago corrected the pH in his orchard with lime. And he adds additional lime every year, so his trees are growing in a better conditions than mine. The size and number of leaves does make a difference for fruit production. It's estimated that an apple or pear, say, needs an average of about 30 to 40 leaves to support that fruit. So the size and number of leaves makes a difference. Okay, first step. Go to your county extension office and ask for a soil testing kit. They will give you this. They will give you this little cardboard box for your sample, and they will give you the form. The form will ask you what kind of crop you're going, whether it's grain or vegetable hay. You want to check out home orchard on there. Put your soil sample in this little box. When you get your soil sample, don't dig from one spot in a big orchard, because we want average sample over your whole orchard. So you go around over the whole acre and dig 6 or 8 holes underneath the grass roots, under the side, try to get pure dirt out of there. You put that dirt, just a tablespoon, maybe you dig a foot deep, you get like a tablespoon of dirt out of each hole, put it in a clean plastic pan or pot, and shake it around, let it dry out, and mix that together. Because, like I said, your goal is to get an average over your whole orchard. It can vary, your pH results can vary from one site to from the other, like 100 yards over, pH may be different. So you just want the average. Be neat. Don't send them a box full of mud and grass roots. They don't like that. They usually evaluate it pretty fast. They usually goes to the state agriculture university. They'll test it for pH and other nutrients. They usually send results by email now, pretty fast, within a couple of weeks. They'll send you a complete result and recommendations for correcting the pH, as well as fertilizer and other minerals like zinc and magnesium. So, now you have a goal, something to work towards. Don't expect to correct all your soil deficiencies in one year. It just takes a little time. Like I said, a lot of us with red clay soil will have a pH level in the 4.5 to 5.5. Lime, calcium carbonate is how you correct that pH level. 2 main types of lime, calcitic and dolomitic lime. Calcitic lime is your regular calcium carbonate. Dolomitic lime is calcium carbonate that will have more magnesium in it. And a lot of soils in this area of the country are magnesium deficient. And if your soils test says that, you would really want dolomitic lime. What kind of lime you get may depend on what region of the country you're in. It depends on the source. I think a lot of lime coming from Alabama is dolomitic. Well, it has magnesium, but both types would serve the same purpose, to lower the pH. The people selling the lime may not even know if it's calcitic or dolomitic lime, so it doesn't make that much of a difference. Lime is usually put out at the rate of tons per acre. It takes more than a little bit. It takes a lot, and it takes for a long time for it to soak in and be effective. There's 3 common types of lime available. Bags of this powdered, hydrated lime. It's a concentrated form. It's quick acting because it's powdered like that. You can find this at nearly every feed store, hydrated lime. It's a little bit hard to spread out. It's pretty cheap, like 10 or 12 bucks for a bag like this. Hard to spread out. I would not want to breathe a lot of this or get it in my eyes. It is pretty caustic. It's kind of hard to spread. That would be used for a smaller plot, like a 1/8 of an acre or a big flower bed, something like that. Too cheap. It's too expensive for a wide area. This type, pelletized lime, that is the most common, and it's this. Little evenly sized pellets, so it's easy to spread through a seed spreader like this, or a shoulder mounted type like this. Very easy and convenient to use. Every feed store and nursery, they'll all have this. Even the big box stores in the spring will have this. Very easy to apply. This costs you $3.75 for a 40-pound bag, which is cheap, but we're talking about putting out lime by tons per acre on a plot the size I have. So you're talking about a lot of money when you're putting this out on 2.5 acres. I think this will be too expensive for anything more than a 1/4 or a 1/2 acre. So we're essentially talking about this. That's ag lime, agricultural lime. Sometimes it's in mixed particle size. Sometimes it's called slag. It looks like this. It's gray, gritty, sandy dirt is what that is. But it's alkaline, and that's what you need to change the pH. If you're talking about a big plot, you're talking about tons of this per acre. This ag lime cost me $38 a ton, which is cheap. That's what you want. You can find this stuff at any rural agricultural area will have this because the commercial farmers have to have it, of course. The commercial farmers are buying it by the tens of tons, and they load this stuff onto a big spreader trailer and they haul it behind a big farm truck or a tractor. And around, which is great. That's just what you want. For this size plot, I needed about 9,000 pounds, 2.5 acres. To change my pH is what I want to do. It turns out those spreader tractors are big, heavy-duty machinery and were actually too big for me to haul on this quarter-ton pickup. And I don't have a tractor, and I probably could not have maneuvered around even on this space, even if I'd been able to haul it. So I ended up talking to the county co-op guy to load this stuff in the back of my pickup bed 1,000 pounds at a time with this front end loader. They don't always like to do that because they can't judge the weight. You don't want to put too much in there. If they're dumping it in there with the front end loader, watch your wheels. Make sure you don't get too much weight. You can easily add tons of this stuff because this sits in big mountains outside every co-op or feed store, and it gets wet and it's heavy. But and I drove around. My son and I drove around this field, and we spread it out with shovels in our hands, slung it out as evenly as we could, which was a huge amount of trouble, of course, and a massive upper body workout. But that's how important I thought it was. Before I really plant a lot of my trees, I thought it was that important to go that much labor to spread this lime. Lime is slow acting. You spread it out and nothing happens. It really takes at least 6 months to get a full effect. So I'll wait till this spring and test it again. Probably have to add more. My experience is it's hard to over lime a field. You nearly always from the start can even add half again as much as recommended by the extension service. It works better and faster if you would disc or till this into the soil, of course, so when it has better soil contact. But even if you just throw it on top of the ground, it'll eventually soak into the ground and has an effect, just not a fast one. All this stuff about liming probably doesn't apply to the black belt regions of Mississippi and Alabama. Those are regions where limestone is naturally occurring, and those will have more neutral soil anyway. You're lucky to live in such an area. If you do, you'll notice that property values are high because that's prime agricultural land. I don't notice people in the Mississippi Delta putting out much lime, so I'm assuming they have pretty neutral soil. Other amendments, go by your soil test. They'll give you specific recommendations as to nutrients like N, P, and K, and other minerals, zinc, boron, magnesium. I think most other nutrients can be added later after planting. Adding biological nutrients to your soil, yes, you definitely need to, any type of soil. I think we're all aware soil is a living organism. It ain't just dirt. It needs sunlight and water and food, just like any living organism. The mechanism that where roots and all the soil, fungi, and bacteria work, humans are just starting to hit on the edge of research on that. We hardly even understand it, and I cannot explain it in this short lesson, but it's complex. Soil is a complex living organism. It's more complicated than humans can grasp. To suffice it to say, working any kind of dead biological material into the soil will improve it. If you've got hard red clay, it will make it looser. It make it more like loam. It will give it texture and tilth. If you've got pure sand, it will give it better texture where it will hold water better into that. Working compost, biological materials into the soil seemed like the answer to any and every soil problem. You can't go wrong with that. As far as pH levels go, I noticed that my friends who work compost into the soil over a long period of years, they seldom have pH problems. I don't understand the chemistry of that, but I think working compost in the soil is the answer to pretty much all your soil problems. Planting your new fruit trees. Let's walk out here and I'll show you a planting hole. Planting your new tree. In clay soil, dig a big hole, bigger than you think you would need. Dig a $50 hole for a $10 tree is what they say. The reason why is because it's so compact, and you by taking the soil out of the pot and throwing it aside, you loosen up that soil, and then you fill it back in together, and it will loosen it up and allow the roots to live in there better. You don't want smooth sides like this. Break it up. You want it not to have a pot effect. That is a tree root. Take any kind of trash, water soak in. You don't want a smooth hole. Dig it deeper than you think you would need. In sand, if I was planting in pure sand, I would have a relatively small hole because I don't need to break it up. Plant the tree in the same level that it's growing in the pot. That's the graft line. So you'd plant it just about that level. Have your graft above that. Backfill it with that soil. Break it up in your hand. Don't put big clumps in there. Break it up all fine and water it in. Really mud it in. Make it a waterlogged. You need to really put the water in, like a 5-gallon bucket of water in every hole. Don't add fertilizer to the planting hole or any other amendments. I don't like to dig a big hole and fill it full of rich soil, like potting soil, to make it too rich. You can spoil the tree by doing that, because sooner or later, these tree roots are going to have to live in your native soil, no matter what kind you have. If you make the soil too rich in the planting hole, like full of good Miracle-Gro potting soil, the tree roots will try to stay in that hole, and they'll get like pot bound. The tree roots will stay and grow in little circles around there, trying to stay in that rich soil. They don't want to venture out into this hard red clay. And this is the soil I have. Sooner or later, they're going to have to venture out in there. And I want them to go ahead and adapt to this soil or go ahead and die before I spend a lot of time watering them. My experience is don't add amendments except maybe a little bit of lime, but just plunge them into your native soil. Setting out your new orchard, put them in straight rows if you possibly can. You can look down these rows and see I've kept them as straight as possible. Right now, you may think that you'll never need to run irrigation lines or run heavy equipment between your trees, but you probably will sooner or later. It's a big advantage to setting them out in straight rows, evenly spaced. In my new property, I've measured off that fence. I've left 30 feet for the first row in case I ever need to get equipment down here. And the trees are planted 15 feet apart and 15 feet between rows. That's cramming them together pretty close. 20 or 25 feet is more standard between the trees. But I actually want to cram mine together to try to stun them a little bit. And I want to pack a bunch of them in a small space. To line off these rows, like I said, I measured off that fence. I've got a bunch of these little iron stakes, and I can hammer them into the ground. I put a stake at the end, first of the row and the end of the row, measuring carefully off this fence. I stretch this string in between them. Starting from the first spot, I can use this 100-foot tape measure to measure off 15 feet between every tree. And I mark them with these flags, and I'll leave these flags in there in a good place. And putting them out with the flag in the spot before you plant them, you can actually look at it and study on that a little bit and see if they're right the way you want them. This orchard, actually, I have lined up as best I can vertically and horizontally, and also diagonally. You'll look at a straight row of trees each way, which will give them the maximum amount of sunlight exposure, hopefully, when they get to be big trees. It's just like when you're measuring off to start a new orchard, put out a lot of trees. It's just like when you're measuring for the foundations of a house. You need to be really accurate, because the higher up you go, by the time you get to the roof, if you're not accurate on the bottom part, you'll be way off and all whop jagged by the time you get to the top. So it makes a difference laying out your orchard too. You'll like it better in the long run if your trees are in straight rows. I don't like grass to compete with my young trees for the first few years, so I mulch them heavily. I lay down a thick layer of cardboard or newspaper all around the trees, and I put this compost around it. This is cypress bark and wood shavings that I've collected, but any kind of compost you will lay on top of this will work. The paper is really acting as a weed barrier, and the mulch holds it down. The type of mulch, leaves, spoiled hay, whatever you have, it doesn't really matter so much. And all this stuff, the paper and the mulch, will eventually rot down and add nutrients to the soil. So you're really kind of feeding the tree at the same time as you're mulching. And don't pile it up close to the tree. I tell people, make donuts. Don't make volcanoes. You don't want this piled up to a point around it. To keep weeds down, but it will hold a little moisture in the soil during the dry spells. Cover crops between trees. Yes, probably a good idea. Comfrey, clover, stuff like that, add nutrients to the soil. If you plant a covered crop, don't think because you planted that deliberately that weeds won't grow in there. So it's a little trouble to maintain a cover crop. I like the idea of planting pollinator attracting plants in between my fruit trees. Clover is a good cover crop. Clover will only thrive in pretty much neutral pH soil. So if your clover is doing really good, your pH is probably right, and your fruit trees will thrive too. The exception is crimson clover, and you see that planted along the sides of the highway department because it will tolerate acid soil, and it also has a bigger seed than any other clover, so it's cheap. Clover, a lot of people like putting out clover in the orchards because it fixes nitrogen in the soil. And I don't really think adding nitrogen is that much important. Most apples and pears and such don't need high nitrogen. If you put clover out, the deer will come there and stay there all the time and eat constantly. So you're laying out an appetizer for the deer and they'll stay for the fruit tree buffet when the trees are big enough. I don't really want to attract more deer, but clover and there's other cover crops you can make. The time to plant. Right now, we're filming this in late November. There's a big advantage to planting most fruit trees in the fall and winter because they just sit there like this one. You won't see any growth from the top, but actually the roots are going to be growing all winter. And hopefully by the time that your hot weather and next summer comes, you'll have a well-established root system. So essentially you need less water in the summer after. The big advantage to that. People up north like to plant in the springtime because their soil freezes solid during the winter, and that will kill the tree, of course. But in the deep south and southeast, we seldom have that problem. So it's a big advantage in their survival rate to planting in the fall and winter, and I've definitely proven that. Figs would probably be the only thing. All figs are cold sensitive, so I would really kind of recommend planting them in the spring, and they need to get a good growth during their first growing season. An orchard, just like any kind of farming effort, planting pays off big time. Plan. Do a lot of planning before you reach for your shovel. We'll have some questions now, and hopefully I'll have some answers. I may not be able to answer all the questions, but I'm pretty good at making up answers real fast. Or I know some people that are real experts, and we can ask, and they'll tell you just about anything you want to know. I spend a few hours a day communicating with people through emails and phone calls about this kind of stuff. So the access to the experts is possible. Thank you a lot. Good luck.
Great. Thank you, Larry. That was a really great video. We had some really good questions come up as that was playing. So I'm going to go ahead and start with some of those. The first question was from Charlotte. She said, you mentioned in the video that you choose to cram the trees in to stunt them, I think is what you said. Can you talk a little bit more about why you do that, Larry?
Yes, because I have limited space and I have a collection. I'm actually an apple and pear collector, so I want a bunch, and I have limited space. Someone else growing root stock. There's advantages to having a smaller tree. They're easier to pick, and you actually get more production per acre on a dwarf or semi-dwarf rootstock. For those of us in the deep south, the southeast, there's literally no proven semi-dwarf rootstock that works. So I graft on standard size apple and pear trees stock, and my trees will get big if I let them. I control them by pruning. the dwarfing rootstock, by definition, has an inferior root system. That's what makes them dwarf, smaller, a lesser root system. In my experience with the dwarf trees, when they get 5 or 6 years old and start bearing and they get top heavy, they flop over. So all dwarf and semi-dwarf rootstock will need to be staked permanently, which is no big deal. But I just like a freestanding tree. To me, that's the definition of a tree. It has to stand up on its own roots. And I get better anchorage on seedling apple and pear rootstock. Spacing, more normal spacing between trees would be 20 to 25 foot. I'm hoping, I want them growing where the limbs almost touch, but not actually intertwined. I'll prune them to really get that pruning and stuff. But I like full-size rootstock, seedling apple and pear for that anchorage. You know, a tree should stand up by itself. It shouldn't need support, to me.
That's helpful.
But you can space them wherever you want.
Yeah. And then Allison also had another good question. She asked if you inoculate with mycorrhizal fungi at all when you're planting.
I don't in my big field in this hard red clay, and I think it would like it. It would take a lot of that. I hear differing opinions. Some people say it's so common in nature, and dead leaves and dead grass and everything. They say the native soil should have that. One year, I put a lot of that stuff out in my nursery beds. In my high tunnel, I had deep, rich nursery beds, 18 to 24 inches deep. And I inoculated a lot of that. And I had some fantastic growth coming off those things. So I kind of like the idea. I'm not doing it currently. Right now, I'm planting over a big 2.5 acre field that would take a lot of that. I'm hoping I'll put some leaves, some dead leaves. I'll rake them up and put them around the tree as mulch. And I hope I get some mycorrhizal fungi in there. So naturally, yeah, I like it. It seems to help when you have contained nursery beds with fungi in there.
Yeah. And then Kira Booth was asking about figs. Kira said that they've heard differently where they are in Texas, that figs lose their leaves in winter but come right back in the spring.
Oh yes, they're deciduous trees. They normally lose their leaves. It's only in semi-tropics where they keep their leaves year round. Where I am in the northern part of Mississippi, figs are all cold sensitive. There's none that's really tough against the cold. They typically die back. Young fig trees die back the year or two for several years after you plant them. The secret is to keep the roots alive. And if the roots will not get frozen over the winter, even if the top dies back, they'll resprout, throw up 6 or 8 feet of growth in 1 year and have figs that very year. Figs get tougher as they get older. I see some old trees, 100-year-old fig bushes, 30 feet tall, that I've seen them take it down to 6 degrees Fahrenheit and not even tip high. So they toughen up with age.
Wow.
But
yeah,
no big deal.
What was that last part you said, Larry?
I said, no, they're supposed to drop their leaves for most of us this time of year.
This is Jennifer. Larry propagates a lot of figs, and he can do it easily. And when we sell them, our growing recommendations for people is to the first couple of years, if they're going to put it in go ahead and put it in the ground. The first couple of years in the fall, just rake as many leaves as you can around that tree to help insulate it. And as those leaves decompose, they also create a natural heat as they decompose. So that really helps to insulate and protect your roots. And, it may die off all the way down to the ground the first couple of years. But like Larry said, as long as the roots don't die, it'll sprout back up. You may even have, a couple of trees that sprout up after those first die off.
And Jacob had another question about figs, which was if they're still in pots, should you bring them in the winter?
If you can and have the space and can give them a little bit of light over winter, you can keep them alive during the winter. I don't have that much space myself, so I'm having to keep some outside. As long as the pot doesn't freeze, you know, you can't have this dirt in the pot freeze solid. But other than that, you have a lot, you know, mine have to take it outside, you know, even if the tops die back a little bit, you know, they're just gonna have to. I don't have space to keep 1,000 trees inside a kitchen.
And then Rob also had a question about planting depth for bare root trees. Should they also be planted at their original depth?
Yes, same thing. I like to sell trees in pots with the root. I generally just don't like to disturb the root system. But the bare root trees I buy, I have just as good a luck planting them, as good a survival rate as I do potted trees. So bare root, yep, same thing.
Great. We had a couple questions about protecting your trees. Shayna, I believe is how it's pronounced, said, how do I protect my bark from damage from weed eaters and lawnmowers? And then we also had a question about protecting your trees from squirrels.
Squirrels are rascals. Now, they'll get an apple, a pear, they'll tear it up just to get those tiny little seeds from the inside of the thing. They don't actually usually eat the flesh, so that's aggravating. I don't have good squirrel protection device. My orchards at both properties are a little bit away from the big hardwoods. That helps. Squirrels don't like to jump out of the oak tree and run across open ground to get to your fruit tree. So I have that open space between my orchard and my hardwood tree. So that protects mine. They're rascals. What was the other part of the question? Oh, weed eaters and stuff. Young trees, you can get a plastic grow tube, they call it, from 2 to 4 or 5 feet long, you know, like 4 inches in diameter. You can put those around a young tree to protect the bark. And if you'll lay down a layer of mulch and paper around the tree for 2 or 3 feet around the tree, of course, you wouldn't be driving your lawnmower against that, and that will keep the weeds growing. So you'll keep your weed eaters and lawnmowers naturally away from there with a good layer of mulch. It helps to find it. Because one little tree, a 1-year-old tree planted in the ground, no layer of mulch and compost around it, you don't always see that, and you run your lawnmower right over it. So that's another advantage to mulching heavily around them.
And I have a confession to make, and Larry has wanted to wring my neck many a times when I've been on the riding lawnmower and I try to get too close to the tree and just scrape the tree or knock a little bark off. And there's products that you can buy to heal that wound. But, you know, if you strip the bark off a tree like that and just leave that wound open, it will die. So especially when they're young like that, there are products that you can buy to seal that and to help it heal. What we have to protect from mainly in our orchards here and in Carroll County is deer. And especially when the tree is young and just got a few branches and a few luscious, tender. I mean, don't y'all love to eat baby salad greens? They're so tender and tasty and sweet. Well, that's what the deer think too. They see those nice, fresh green little leaves budding off of that new tree, and they will literally, even when it's 5 or 6 feet tall, they will literally grab a limb and yank it off just to yank those leaves off. They'll break your tree in half. Or if some of you have deer in rutting season, they'll come along and they will scrape their antlers up against the tree to rub off the velvet off their horns, and it will strip, just like that lawnmower or weed eater, it'll strip the bark off. So for many years now, Larry has enclosed a young tree in like 6-foot dog wire and make a circle big enough so that you got several inches so the deer can't just stick their snout in there and still grab the tree. But you might have 18, 20-inch diameter, or maybe 24.
Yeah. Like
but it's called dog wire or concrete wire, something that's sturdy enough that you can put around the tree. And, that might help with the weed eating and lawnmowers too. But you may have to stake that to the ground in some way to kind of keep that cage from being pulled off or yanked over. But that's the biggest problem we have, are deer with young trees. Now, once that tree gets larger, you think it's protected, and pretty much, it will be once those branches get higher. But we've seen, and some of you might have too, they'll stand on their hind legs to yank a pear off of a tree, and that's okay. Same thing with the squirrels. You kind of gotta be forgiving with wildlife. I mean, we're in their area, and we're putting something out there that they can survive and thrive off of. So you kind of got to think some of that's going to be donated to wildlife.
Right. Joe said that he had Canadian geese jumping with wings flapping and grabbing apples off of their tree. So it's everything wants the fruit. I'll also just mention Allison had. What'd you say, Larry?
I started off growing fruit trees to nurture wildlife. I wanted to attract wildlife. I was a big hunter back then, and now I have, and it was successful. So I can't really complain when they actually avail themselves of my fruit. 90% of my fruit goes to the animals and birds.
Yeah. Allison also had some thoughts on squirrels. She said that squirrels got a lot of their apples last summer, and that they did trap and release some, and that she's also heard that motion detector sprinklers are good. She hasn't tried them, but that's an interesting suggestion. Thanks for that, Allison. We have a lot of great questions here. Let me see. We had one up here. Let me go back. So Lee was asking about side dressing. Lee said, knowing that lime's the best, do you ever side dress with compost? And if so, what's the best time of year to do that?
Any time of year, put out lime or compost, either one, any time of year. Do it now and it will start rotting down well at the spring when the roots start growing even more, but anytime.
And Larry, do you recommend doing soil tests again at regular increments with the trees, or do you just kind of amend at the beginning and then add compost as you go along?
I did soil tests, and I'm going by that to amend my orchard to start off with before I have many trees planted there. But yes, a yearly soil test is a good thing. They cost $6 or $8 from your local extension office, so it's cheap and well worth that information. And the results can surprise you sometimes. You'll get better results from the state ag university than you can on your home testing kits. And believe in those results. And
they're the experts.
Yeah, they're the experts. So.
Yeah. We also had some questions about pruning. There's one question about just some general resources. There's a request already for a sequel to this session on pruning. And then Kira also had a question specifically about if you know of any resources for pruning tropicals like star fruit, wax jambu, anything like that. So any good resources you have on pruning or tips?
Pruning, if you want to prune the tropicals, join the Facebook page of the Texas Rare Fruit Growers, Texas Fruiting Plant Growers, it's also called. Join them. That's mostly people south of Houston. That's your tropical experts, semi-tropical people there. Ask questions there. Pruning is subjective. Everybody does it different ways. I've tried to teach pruning classes before, but I'm teaching my opinion, and you get the next expert and they would prune entirely differently. There's thousands of YouTube videos out there and a good many books on pruning, and just like I said, everybody expresses different opinion. Keep this in mind. You prune generally for more fruit production. Apples and pears and most trees bear on wood that is 2 to 10 years old. It's bearing on your older limbs. Most berries, blueberries, and muscadine is included as berry. They bear on the current year's growth or last year's growth, 1-year-old wood. So like a blueberry or muscadine, it's going to grow on the growth that you have in this year. That's going to be your next year's fruit. So, and 3 or 4 year old blueberry or blackberry or muscadine stem, that's not going to bear fruit. it bears fruit on the current year's growth or last year's growth. So, which is completely different than apples and pears. So that is really your secret to pruning for fruit production. You need to know the age, what age wood the wood needs to be to bear fruit.
In the time of year.
In the time of year.
Before the
It's hard to teach a pruning class. Like I said, everybody would tell you something a little different. You can actually prune a fruit tree to please you. You can prune an apple, a pear, or mulberry tree as a hedge if you want to, or you can prune it to grow straight up or spread out horizontally. Prune it to please you, in a way.
Edible landscaping.
Edible landscaping.
I like that. Prune it to please you. We'll send out bumper stickers. Kira had a couple questions that I wanted to get to. Kira asked, do you do a cluster growth or any thoughts on cluster growing? They're specifically talking about 2 trees within 18 inches of each other.
You can, and I know people that some people plant 2 trees in one hole. I never saw the advantage of it. If it's the same species, I wouldn't plant like 2 pears in one hole. I would plant 1 tree, a single stem, and I would graft different varieties onto those limbs as it grows older, as it spreads out some horizontal limbs. I graft onto those. That's how I keep my collection. I don't have a different stem for every variety I grow. I'm looking at hundreds of varieties that I'm experimenting with. So I'll grow, say, an Orient pear on a single stem. When it branches out, I'll graft a different variety on each limb. That's how we collectors keep our collections. You don't have to have 100 acres if you want 100 varieties. You can cram them all together, which is cool, and it looks really unique when they start to bear fruit. You really you can get carried away. You definitely need a permanent label on those things, because I've got a lot of older trees have a dozen different varieties grafted onto them, and I've lost the tag, so I have no idea what they are once they start bearing. It's really unique to see all those different fruit on the same tree, but you need to keep up with identification. You can get carried away with multi-grafting like that.
One of Larry's first pear trees that he grew, and it's probably 30 years old or more now. And when he started experimenting with grafting, he started grafting all kinds of different varieties, and he didn't label them. Like he said, labeling is very important. And you want a permanent label, not something that's going to fade in the sun. So I call that his Frankenstein pear, because it has so many different varieties, and where the graft wound heals, sometimes it'll be lumpy and bumpy where that wound has healed and is scarred. And so, and sometimes you'll have a variety that will grow bigger and faster than the original limb that you grafted it onto. So it looks strange, but it's got all these different varieties. And if you're just growing things to eat, it doesn't matter if it tastes good, keep propagating. If you don't like the taste or texture of that pear tree, cut that limb off and graft something else.
And then Kira also had a question, if you have any thoughts on banana or papaya circles to create microclimates to help subtropical or tropical plants survive. You done any of that, Larry?
I don't, because it's too cold here. You need to do that on the Gulf Coast around Houston. I know Texas people that do that a lot, and other friends do that a lot. So I don't have much experience with bananas. I try so hard. There's so many different interesting fruits. And if you research tropical fruits, there's thousands and thousands of tropical fruits. In the temperate zone, we have apple and pear for someone, this and that. But there's thousands of tropical fruits and semi-tropical fruits that most of us in the temperate zone have never heard of. It will amaze you. I try so hard, and there's so much interesting stuff. I try so hard to keep my focus on just a few varieties that I know are suitable for my climate. There's just an endless amount of experimenting you can do. But bananas, I don't even want to try them in North Mississippi. Papayas, I know people grow on papayas in greenhouses. They're a little tougher than you think, but I'd rather spend my time on more temperate plants right now.
If they like a tropical taste, they might try a pawpaw tree.
Yeah. Then we had a couple questions about recommended types of mulch. So someone asked what kind of wood mulch you would recommend, and then another person asked if we should be aware of any problems using leaves or needles from the forest as mulch. I would assume maybe if there's any concerns about disease or fungi that you might bring in.
I have an uncle that makes outside lawn furniture out of cypress wood, and he saves those bags for me. So I get a couple of bags, big garbage bags of dry cypress wood shavings and sawdust, and that's what I use. But it doesn't matter. I think any kind of mulch, don't use fresh pine sawdust. You don't want fresh sappy wood like that. You want it to be dry. But any kind of wood chips or sawdust, stuff from the sawmill, as long as it's not too fresh, that works. Spoil hay, leaves. I'm not fussy about the type of mulch. I think it's important to mulch young trees, but the type, I don't think it matters. And no stuff you gather from the woods. I like pine needles because they lay flat. Once you spread them out, they lay flat and lay tight to the ground. And local leaves, that's great. And you can hope that they have some mycorrhizal fungi in there, and that will actually help. It's probably beneficial. I'm not fussy about mulch. When you compost, and I'll pile anything that'll rot into my compost piles. I'm not fussy. And mulch is about the same way. Don't put green sawdust, and don't put too much green horse or cow manure around them. It's better if they're dried a little bit better, but there's a big help to mulching heavily around a young tree.
So Lee has a question about persimmon, or about moving trees. Lee said, I have a 3-year-old Asian persimmon that is a little too close to a pecan and is getting too much shade. I want to move it. Have you ever had to move a tree? And echoing your wise words of planning ahead.
I have. I've moved some older trees, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. I will tell you about persimmons. They're bad to throw out a long tap root. So once you dig that sucker up, you'll find it probably has a tap root 3 or 4 or 5 feet long. You'll have to sever that as deep as you're willing to dig until you get tired of digging till you get tired of it, then cut it off with your pruning shears. They don't particularly like that, but yeah, I would move if it's an unsuitable spot. Move. I would do that during the dormant season. Now during the winter, I wouldn't do it when it was living. You can move trees. They don't particularly like it, but you can try.
And then Lee also asked if you have any favorite varieties, favorite places that you get your varieties. I know you probably could talk about that for a long time. We'd love to hear any varieties that you enjoy, Larry.
I can, but what I promote is growing varieties that originated in your area or have a long history of proven performance in your area. So I'm a big apple guy. I probably shouldn't be in Mississippi, but I collect apples, and I have old homestead varieties from all over the Southeast. I do that for my apple collectors, friends, other people that do it. We trade back and forth. I sell a little bit of sign wood from all these old heirloom varieties in January and February after I've done my pruning, and a few other people do to try some of all these unknown oddball old homestead trees. It's not a major source of sign wood. There's some places.
Some people just swap.
Yeah, we swap back and forth. We have Facebook forums. If you look at my personal Facebook page and look at the groups I'm in, you'll be amazed. Fruit growers and collectors are organized some degree. We have NAFEX, North American Fruit Explorers. We have a Southern Fruit Fellowship. We have a Southern Apples Facebook page. We have Southern Pears. We have a Plums for the hot and humid South. There's a Louisiana Mayhaw Association. Look on those. If you look through Facebook, that's how we communicate. There's a North American Sign Exchange. That's what you call a cutting, 1-year-old cutting that you use to propagate a tree. A sign, SCION. We trade those little sticks of wood back and forth through the mail in January and February and March, right before the grafting season. We trade them back and forth. So essentially, if you want to try a variety like a Collie apple from Grenada, Mississippi, or Yellow Hamilton from Hamilton, Alabama. You have to catch up with somebody like me or one of my collector friends and ask us, and we'll trade this stuff back and forth. So it's a little hard to get into it. Knowing people that are doing it is your key, really.
Having a good network of like interested people.
Great. And then on the topic of resources, Charlotte also mentioned that you have a wealth of books behind you. And if there are any favorite go-tos that you have for resources for growing trees, she said she just got a copy of Fruit Trees for Every Garden by Oren Marin. Palin is loving it.
It's backwards. The title is backwards on, when you do Zoom, it's title is backwards. This is Old Southern Apples by Lee Calhoun. Mr. Calhoun just passed away this year, but he was one of those old timers. He was an explorer, and he and several other people in his age group years ago traveled all over the Southeast and found apples. Some of them are extinct. But this is Larry's Apple Bible.
This is the only book that is a good reference on old Southern apples. It's pretty much the only one, and we all go by this. It's a lot of my friends, the collector friends that I have, sent submissions to Mr. Lee, and he wrote that based on that. There is another book. There was a lady named Joyce Neighbor. She just passed away recently in Alabama, in north central Alabama. She had an apple nursery, and she wrote, you can't find it, but she had a self-published book of about 90 pages that had unique varieties of apples that she discovered. This one, The Fruits and Fruit Trees of Monticello. Peter J. Hatch was a curator at Thomas Jefferson's home, Monticello, and he wrote a book on the fruit and fruit trees of Monticello, and he wrote another one on the vegetables, colonial type vegetables of Monticello, and he wrote another one on colonial ornamental plants. So he spent a lifetime collecting the trees. In Monticello, supposedly, they have the orchards and gardens that are in the same shape. They think Thomas Jefferson could walk in there and recognize his plants there today in the same places. So they spent a lot of time doing that. That's an excellent source if you're interested in colonial and really early American fruit growing. What's another one? Uncommon Fruits for Every Garden by Lee Rack. That's the Bible for the weird stuff. Mulberries and gummies and papayas and all that kind of stuff like that. That's the good one to go by. Excellent thing. And good tips on propagation, which is hard to find. Pawpaws. Here's one book on pawpaws. There's several of them. Pawpaw in Search of America's Forgotten Fruit by Andrew Moore. There's a lot of interest in pawpaws nowadays. This is not only on fruit trees, but I love this book, and this is a good forum for this. Renewing America's Food Traditions by Gary Paul Nabland. That is on fruit trees, but this is a listing of the history of stuff by region through North America. And it also includes livestock and grains and vegetables, all kind of stuff. A lot of stuff the Indians and early colonists grew. That's cool. They had all kind of weird chickens and hogs back then too. It would amaze you. This book will blow your mind. But anybody that's interested in the permaculture homesteading type stuff will love this book. Those are some of my favorites.
Those are great. Thank you, Larry. I want to get all of those. We had a question about the best place to get scions of rarer varieties of fig. Do you have any recommendations for that?
There's, I have friends that are fig collectors. There's at least two or maybe even three Facebook pages where they trade fig signs, and get on there. I'm sure you can Google it and find some. I think I'm on Raped's fig group, but there's some others, and we trade them back and forth through the mail. You know, figs are trendy right now, and it'll surprise you how many varieties are out there. They trade them back and forth, and they sell for pretty nice prices sometimes.
Great. We've got some great comments in the chat. If you're keeping up with that, one thing I wanted to mention, Allison mentioned that they really like the aluminum tags that you emboss with the variety, because they don't fade. So that's a really good permanent labeling option. I know we have some really great apple and pear trees that were planted long before I got here, and I have no idea what variety they are. So that's a great recommendation. Thanks, Allison. Charles had a question about Satsuma oranges. It was just a kind of a general question, but any thoughts you have, Larry, on growing those, tips?
Oh, Satsumas are great. Satsumas are the queen of all citrus, perfect. They're not too tart. They're mostly sweet, and they have a zipper peel. You can peel them with one hand, and they have a few seeds. So Satsumas are great. And Satsumas and kumquats are among your most cold hardy citrus. I would not recommend planting them in the ground above central Mississippi, around the level of Jackson, Birmingham's getting a little cool for citrus in the ground. They really belong on the coast. I love Satsumas. I propagate a few. Citrus, you have to go to some trouble if you want to plant it on the ground above central Mississippi and Alabama. You essentially have to cover them during cool spells, which is a little more trouble than I want to grow to. So I really grow them as indoor potted plants, recommended above central Mississippi. Do great on the Gulf Coast. You definitely need to have them.
Varieties.
Like I said, Satsumas, there's 3 or 4 varieties of Satsumas that grow on the Gulf Coast. I like citrus. It's just where I am now in North Mississippi, almost to the Tennessee line. They don't really belong in the ground. Citrus is more cold hardy than you think. It's not so much the cold weather that kills citrus, it's a sudden change in temperature. So if you have a nice cool fall where it gradually turns cooler and cooler and the citrus can harden off, they'll take surprisingly cold temperatures. If it goes from 70 degrees one day down to 20 degrees at night, it kills all citrus. None citrus is cold hardy enough to stand that. So it's that sudden drop in temperature that really hurts your citrus trees.
Oh, that's tough. That's exactly what we've been experiencing, at least in my neck of the woods. Kaylor, there were a couple questions on that subject. Kaylor asked, they have a Meyer lemon that froze but is still alive. Will it ever bear fruit?
Yes, they'll sprout back out. Citrus and figs too. They'll sprout back out and throw good crops the next year after freezing. Myers lemon is not this cold hardy. If you're planting in the ground, it's going to be on the Gulf Coast. Even on the Gulf Coast in Florida, once a decade, you have a killing event that kills all citrus down to the ground. And some of us are starting to root citrus instead of grafting it. The advantage of that, if you have rooted citrus on its own roots, if you have a cold event that kills it down to the ground, it will resprout true to the variety, and that will come up and they'll grow a lot, and they can often bear fruit the year after dying back, just like a fig. So there's an advantage to citrus on its own roots.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't realize that.
They want to know if you can do it better.
I just have to share. I love your stories on here. He said that he traded a neighbor her first lemon from her tree for an Italian cream cake. So that's a good suggestion if you're looking for any lemons. And also mentioned that his neighbor who grows lemons moves her tree into a protected lean-to in the winter to help protect that tree from the frosts. We also had a question from Cedric about would it be better to grow citrus in a greenhouse instead of out on the land?
Oh, definitely. If you're anywhere farther over 50 or 60 miles from the Gulf Coast, in Florida, it's better in a greenhouse. If you're serious about growing it, you have to do that. Now, I grow them in the ground in an unheated high tunnel. It gets freezing there, but there's a little delay a high tunnel protects it from a really fast temperature drop. So they do okay. Only the more cold hardy types, citrus and kumquats, what I put in the ground. But I know people growing them 300 miles north of the Gulf Coast that grow inside unheated high tunnel for fruit production, and they sell very well up here. So greenhouse citrus is really considered semi-tropical or so. So, they like the heat. They like full blasting heat. There's a limit to how much cold they can tolerate. So.
And Larry, you mentioned kumquats, and there was a question about whether those can be grown throughout Alabama, and if they can be planted in the field, or like you're saying, should they really be in a greenhouse?
Same as satsumas. I would not plant them in the ground above central Mississippi, Alabama. Really, not more than 50 or 60 miles off the Gulf Coast. Satsumas and kumquats, like I said, they have some cold hardiness, more so than Myers lemons or oranges or grapefruits. So it's iffy. It depends on how much trouble you're willing to go to cover them up during cool spells. You know, if you have it on the south side of your house and you get some sun and maybe you have a wood fence around it to protect it from the wind and stuff, yeah, you could do it. It's just a limit to how much trouble you're willing to go to, you know. I get real tired of moving fine citrus indoors and out in the winter, you know, but people do that. Citrus makes a nice indoor potted plant. They will flower and fruit inside the house. Most citrus fertilizes, pollinates itself. So they make nice indoor potted plants. They smell great when they're blooming. I've got satsumas blooming now inside the house.
That's a great recommendation. We have a few questions about varieties. So Kaylor at Eat South said that they need some old apple varieties. What are your favorites? What do you recommend for the Montgomery area of Alabama down south or further south?
I generally talk about this topic an hour or 2 or 3 every day, so I could talk endlessly about that. It's all in the varieties when you get into apples. You know, they're really, the farther south you go, the harder apples to grow. Apples have a chill hour requirement. They need a certain, like most deciduous trees in temperate zones, they need a certain amount of cold during the winter to really set fruit. It kind of resets the biological clock on the thing during dormancy, the number of cold hours. We call those chill hours, and chill hours are the hours during dormancy between 32 and 45 degrees Fahrenheit. And different varieties have different chilling requirements. So you really pick an apple. Apples are fussy about that. So when you get down the Gulf Coast, you really have to be fussy, and there's only a few varieties to do. Up in North Mississippi and Alabama, close to Tennessee, there's a more wide variety of apples you can go. On the Gulf Coast, you get probably 500 or 600 chill hours per winter. So Red Delicious, say, that has a chilling hour requirement of about 1,200 hours. So if you grow a Red Delicious on the Gulf Coast, it literally cannot set fruit. It's the weather is not right. I mean, physically, it does not have enough cold weather during a typical winter to bear fruit. The tree doesn't pick up that physical signal. So that's why you would not plant Red Delicious on the Gulf Coast. And same thing if you planted a low chiller apple up in Tennessee, say, they want to start budding after a chill requirement's been met. It may be 500 hours. So for me in North Mississippi, if I plant an Anna apple, say, it's going to start blooming Anna will bloom after 300 chill hours. So that's January for me. You know, I had Anna blooming in a snowstorm. And of course, the blossoms will get black by that cold and die. So you pick out, that's one requirement to pick out fruit. Apples on the Gulf Coast, shell apple from Alabama, grown north of Mobile in the early 1900s. That was grown commercially on a pretty big scale. Shell's a good one for the Gulf Coast. You can commonly find Anna apples there and Golden Dorset. There's lots. Like I said, for apples, the farther north you get, the more favorites. I have an apple from 30 miles away from me and one that originated 20 miles away from me. And those are 2 of my favorites. And see, I grow those different varieties for all parts of the state. Hand me that list of papers I had right there. I grow them, and I go to sales, and it's surprising. I'll ask somebody where they are, and it surprises you how often I can match people to the closest variety of apples. I can usually match customers to an apple or pear that originated within 20 or 30 or 40 miles from them. I like to do that. Some of the apples, okay, I'll tell you a few apples real fast. Apples from Alabama, Gold Dorset, Cawley apple. There's a Smith seedling of Mississippi, a Cox. Cox Winter from Mississippi, Arkansas black and Hunch apple. Just ignore the whole chill hour theory. They'll grow in Alaska or they'll grow in Uganda or Hawaii. They don't care. There's Hawaii apple, Brogdon apple from Alabama, Dixie Red Light from Alabama, a Captain Davis from Mississippi, Chickasaw from Chickasaw County, Mississippi. The Old Horse and Yates apple from North Georgia have been grown, both of them been grown for at least 300 years. And those are excellent apples to plant, some of the most toughest. I grow a Hackworth from Alabama, a Sebring from South Mississippi, Yellow Hamilton from Hamilton, Alabama. That's in the more northern part. St. Clair from St. Clair County, Alabama. It's like that. I could go on about it forever, but I collect them from, I would sell. I sell different things in North Alabama and Mississippi, in a different group of plants in central parts and different ones on the Gulf Coast. So you really have to get with some of these people that know what they're doing to find these varieties and sell them. I formed a business on this and I'm doing this full time now, but we could talk about this for a long time. So
we had one specific
look on my Facebook page.
Go to your Facebook page. Yes. We had one specific request from someone who was asking for old world apple varieties that you could recommend for a Granny Smith lover with low chill hours.
Horse apple.
Granny Smith is one. Horse apple is one that's really tough. Has a great big apple. Looks like Granny Smith, but it's sour. Horse apple, unless you really like that sour apple taste, horse apple will be a cooking apple and a drying apple. Hawaii is a low chiller. It will be a good bit sweeter than Granny Smith. The color of apples, people want green apples or yellow ones or red. The color does not matter. You can't judge the taste by the green one. We used to see in Red Delicious apples at the grocery store. We know what they taste like. And we see yellow, Gold Delicious. We know what they taste like. They're sweet. And we see Granny Smiths, and they're a little bit tart, and they're green. But a green apple can be sweet, or a red one can be sour, or whatever. You can't really judge them by the color of the skin. You just can't.
And Charles wanted to know, what's your favorite variety of pear?
Leona pear. There's a Leona pear that originated in South Louisiana in the 1930s, and I have found one in Duck Hill, Mississippi, and sent the fruit to my friends, and they seem to think it matches Leona. There's an equal chance that my Leona pear from Duck Hill, Mississippi could be just a random seedling that just seems to match the Leona pear. But Leona, I've been calling my favorite pear for the last 6 or 8 years. That's the one I sell the most of, and it's still my favorite. It's a great big, like 4 inches in circumference diameter pear. It's a round European pear. Not much grit, very few seeds, and I can't prove it, but I strongly suspect that it is very strongly self-pollinating, because but this original tree, I've never seen another pear blooming at that same time in that area. So I like Leona pear. I like Potomac. I like pineapple. There's some unknown varieties. I have one called Sweet Cheeks. That's a pure Asian pear. It's pretty blight resistant. There's one by one we call the Hartwell Cook. Hartwell Cook was one of the founding members of the Southern Fruit Fellowship. And when he got old, he lost the labels on all his trees. He had this unknown, probably Japanese, but maybe Korean, Asian pear. And has huge pears, like 4.5 inches in diameter, distinctly different than most Asian pears, but it's a good tasting pear. So I have pears. I have 6 or 7 varieties that I want to call my standard varieties that I want to sell through my nursery, and that's them. I like Leona.
That's a great recommendation. We had a question now, Larry, about blight. Lee asked if you've ever had a blight. Lee said that they think they had fire blight on a moonglow after heavy pruning and ended up cutting the tree down. Any advice that you have?
Yeah. At one time, I thought I was an expert on growing Asian pears, which are distinctly different than European pears. I grew Asian pears very successfully for about 10 years. They were wonderful. It was just like picking candy bars off the tree. They had such a high sugar content. And then I found out about fire blight. it's a bacterial disease, and it spreads from blossom to blossom, usually by the pollinator insects in the spring. Fire blight fire blight runs in cycles. You'll have years when it's bad for maybe 2 or 3 years in a row, and then it tapers off, and you can have several years or even a decade where you see hardly any of it. And then you'll have another year it's starting to ramp up and you see moderate fire blight, and the year after that you have terrible infestation. In the worst years, they killed the Bradford and Cleveland ornamental pears. When you see it on the Bradford pears, it's a bad fire blight year. What's recommended is it's a bacterial disease, so you spray it with antibiotics. Streptomycin, nearly every feed stores has little cans of a fire blight spray is powdered streptomycin and amoxicillin and other stuff. I sprayed antibiotics on my trees for years. I've given up on it. Antibiotics will not cure fire blight. Sometimes they will prevent it. They claim to prevent it, but you have to spray that beforehand, right before the blossoms start blooming. It can make a difference, maybe. It just doesn't work for me. I swore I'd never buy any more fire blight spray. My strategy is just in the variety. I pick more resistant varieties, and that's why I don't recommend most northern pears like Bartlett and a lot of things like that, because that doesn't have much fire blight resistance. I just pick them out by the resistance. And if you're looking at a nursery catalog, if it doesn't say it has strong fire blight resistance, that means it gets it, and probably pretty bad. So fire blight resistance, one of your number one things you pick out when you pick an apple, a pear or an apple. It's worse than pears, but it hits apples pretty bad too. And if it's very susceptible to fire blight, I just can't grow that variety. I have lots of good apples and pears I've just cut out from my orchard. They get it too bad. Cutting it out is my only strategy. I've learned to recognize it really fast while it's still green. By experience, I learned to recognize it. Cut it out really fast, and you'll see fire blight. Start watching for fire blight a month after or maybe 3 weeks after the blossoms have fallen. That's when the fire blight is really going to start taking effect, and really check it every day and cut it out as fast as you can. It is contagious.
There are some recommendations about whatever tool you're using to clean, tool you're using to cut out that fire blight. You clean the blade after every cut. Do not leave those cut off limbs around your trees. Like, go burn them, dispose of them or something, because that will spread easily to your other trees. While I've interrupted, I'm going to draw your attention to the chat box. And there's your 5 books. I just typed up all the titles, authors, and the ISBN numbers. I'm a librarian, so I'm going to give you the ISBN number because that's the easiest way to order that specific version of the book. However, if you can't find that version, maybe you can find a new edition or a paperback edition, whatever the case may be, it will have a different ISBN number.
One more book.
Also, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Aubrey, if you click on file at the end of the chat, it will actually record a text file of the chat session. So if you want to go back, or you can copy that in the chat and paste it to your Word document or Notepad or whatever on your computer. But there is a way of preserving this chat record from this session if you need to for any reason.
Great. And I'll also copy this and share it with ASAN, and we can get that out to folks as well. That's so wonderful. That's great.
Unfortunately, Mr. Lee Calhoun's book is no longer published. So they will be very rare and very hard to find. Every once in a while, I'll find a copy on Amazon or a used book website. Better World Books is a good place to look for used copies of books. there's several out there, resellers.
Great. And fruit tree orchard expert and librarian, that's a dream team. Let's see. Alan asked, they've had problems with leaf-footed bugs and don't use pesticides strong enough to deter them. Any suggestions on that?
My friends tell me that leaf-footed bugs love sunflowers. They plant sunflowers on the side of the orchard, and the leaf-footed bugs will congregate on those sunflowers, and then they spray them with something like neem oil or something that's, you know, not a harsh inorganic chemical. Oil, dormant. There's types of oils that would kill bugs, and soap, you know, kills some. So. Great.
There's also a comment in here about pet ducks walking and pests, which great, and followed up with a question: best companions or farm animals for orchards? And another, I'll let you answer that question first, and then a bigger question of what are fruit trees' role in permaculture?
I don't have any livestock or poultry in my orchard. I'd like to. Goats, hell no. Goats and orchards not go together at any size orchard. Cows and horses, yeah, they can browse your younger trees a little bit. You have to fence them. They'll rub against the older ones. Hogs in orchards. Hogs do pretty well in orchards. That was been done for hundreds of years, and people are paying attention to that again, especially hogs and mulberries, and chickens and poultry and mulberries. Those go good together. Hogs will root, doesn't usually kill the trees. Hogs are good about cleaning up diseased fruit or fallen fruit. Really, for orchard sanitation, you want to get fallen fruit up as soon as you can, because that can spread disease. And hogs and chickens too are good at picking that up. Ducks can pluck a little bit at your young fruit trees. Not crazy about having there from what I heard, but they will, ducks and guineas and chickens will all pick up slugs, and generally good. I like them. I like animals and poultry better with more mature trees rather than do my young trees. I really want my young trees fenced away from them, but I'd like to start some. I do someday.
And Kira had a good point.
What was the last part of the question?
Oh yes. I'll just mention Kira had a good point about if you put cows or horses in there, just to be careful if they try and eat the small fruit, that can be a choking hazard. The second part of that question was fruit trees' role in permaculture.
Well, permaculture, the way I look at permaculture is sustainable growing. And we're really talking about agriculture, which really means farming. In the old days, your fruit tree orchards were part of every farm. Every farm had them, you know, it's just part of the integrated whole. You have your livestock, you have your cash and food crops. You grow your cash and food crops on your rich bottom lands, you know, the stuff you want to eat and sell. And on your uplands, the hills, that's where you make your pasture and your fruit orchards, which works out pretty good. You can have cows and sheep among your more mature fruit trees. And most fruit trees like drainage. They like a hilly area, and they don't particularly need rich soil. So orchard is just one part of a complete farmstead. The old people knew that. We're rediscovering stuff in permaculture today, like growing mulberries and chickens together, mulberries and hogs, and coppicing mulberries and stuff like that. We're rediscovering them, but that's stuff our ancestors did 1,000 years ago. You know, they're still doing it in some parts of Asia and Europe now. Our ancestors would be laughing at us. We think it's such new, innovative ideas we're coming up with. It's a lot of stuff that's been practiced for thousands of years.
Right.
And still works today.
Right. So we've had a steady stream of really good questions. We've got just about 5 minutes left. So if anyone has any last burning questions or questions that we may have missed in the chat box, feel free to throw those in the chat box. You're also welcome to unmute yourself and ask them in real time as well.
Hi, this is April Williams from Birmingham, Alabama. I just wanted to know what's his Facebook page so that I can find it.
Great question.
Southern Orchards and Nursery. I don't even know if you can see it.
Here, I'll drop
Southern
that.
Cultures, Orchards, and Nursery. Okay. I have that Facebook page. That's one of the main ways I talk to people. And I have a personal Facebook page. I talk to people that way too. And I advertise my phone number, and I'll talk by phone. I'm easiest to catch it through my Facebook or email. Like I said, I answer questions a couple hours a day. And on my Facebook page, I'll often post stuff about the history, or if I get a crop of a certain type of fruit, I'll post pictures bragging about it, and I'll talk about different aspects of it. It's really kind of advertising. When I do that, I'm also advertising for the trees I grow. So I stay pretty busy on it. I don't have a website. I can't keep enough standard inventory to really supply the demand that I have. So I don't have a website that you can order from yet.
And then we had a question. This question came up at the beginning, and I know not everyone was here to hear it. And it was a great question about using endo or ecto mycorrhizae to inoculate at the time of planting fruit trees. And Larry mentioned that's a great thing to do.
I think so. I have limited experience with it. Some of my friends tell me that you could just as well rake up some forest leaf litter and get the same mycorrhizae as you do the little packages of powdered stuff. But my limited experience with it is good, and it makes sense, and I like that. Some has already been in the ground, depending on how rich your ground is. In hard clay or pure sand, those are deficient of everything pretty much. So it can't hurt. I think they will do better.
Great. Any last burning questions or anything that you didn't get to mention, Larry or Jennifer, before we wrap up?
Yes, hi, my name is Irene Scott. I had a question about the soil. Since you mentioned you don't recommend using like a standard potting soil like Miracle-Gro, what would you suggest replacing the soil with once you've dug the hole?
The native soil that you took out of the hole. Because sooner or later, those tree roots are going to have to live in that soil. Whatever soil you have, they're going to have to adapt to that or die. And so you can spoil them. When I started planting fruit trees, I used to dig a hole as big as my waist and fill it up with bushels of rich potting soil. And I found out by experience, if you make it too rich right around the tree roots, they don't want to venture out into your native soil. You're spoiling them. They want to stay right there close, and they're pot bound, root bound, and the tree will be stunted and never thrive very much. Whatever soil you have, those roots are going to have to live in there sooner or later. So I fill it with the native soil. In clay soil, it's a big advantage of taking that out, and then you break it up with your hands and put it back, and you loosen it. That's the advantage to that. So they have to live in your native soil.
Thank you.
Hey, Aubrey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Aubrey. I'm sorry, but I have to use the computer for my job. I have a Zoom retirement meeting I have to host at 1 o'clock. And Larry will love to answer some more questions. I don't say y'all have to end, but could he switch to a phone number? Could you give him one of those Zoom phone numbers and he can switch over to the phone and answer more questions?
Yes, I think I can do that. I'll also say, I think now is actually a great time for us to wrap up. We're pretty close to 1 o'clock, and I don't want to hold folks after. But if folks have more questions, I definitely encourage you to go to the Facebook page that we dropped in the chat. Larry is clearly an incredible wealth of knowledge, as is Jennifer, and you both have been just amazing throughout this whole presentation. So thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for dropping in all your great questions. This has just been such an informative session, and there's a ton of compliments in the chat box here for you both and how good this session has been. I also want to thank ASAN for all the work that they do behind the scenes to make this happen. I want to thank our closed captioner who has been working really hard keeping up with all the text here. So thank you to our closed captioner. And the last thing I'll say, so I can let everyone go, ASAN is a membership-based organization. And if you're familiar with ASAN, they do a lot of really incredible work supporting our local food and farm system here in Alabama and throughout the Southeast. So you can become a member and be part of the network and support their mission to strengthen our local food system. So I'm dropping in the chat link to that there. And then the last thing that I just want to share is a poll. This is a very quick 3-question multiple choice, just letting us know how this session went for you. So I'm just going to launch that here. And if you will fill that out before you leave, that would be great. And then if you'll just join me in thanking Larry and Jennifer for their incredible time and knowledge. We really appreciate it. What a great session. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have fun.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.